The sound of breaking glass pierced the silence of Utica's main street as Mabel Raine crashed through the window of the general store, landing in an unceremonious heap amid shards and splinters. It was 1878 in Montana Territory, and civilized behavior was still more aspiration than reality in this dusty frontier town. "I told you never to come back," the shopkeeper bellowed from the doorway, brandishing a broom like a weapon. "No good comes from harboring the likes of you." Mabel rose with quiet dignity, brushing glass from her simple blue dress. At 22, she'd grown accustomed to the town's contempt, though it stung no less with each encounter. Her copper hair, pulled into a practical braid, caught the afternoon sunlight as she gathered what remained of her dignity. "I have as much right to buy flour as anyone else," she replied, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "My money spends the same. Not in my establishment it don't. Not with your reputation." A crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion like vultures to carrion. Mabel felt the familiar weight of their judgment pressing down on her shoulders. She'd been branded a fallen woman since her husband died, leaving her alone to run their struggling homestead. The rumors, vicious and untrue, had circulated faster than wildfire on dry prairie grass. She was straightening her skirts when a shadow fell across her. Looking up, Mabel found herself staring at the broad-shouldered silhouette of a man she'd never seen before. Flint Jacobson had ridden into Utica that very morning, trail dust still clinging to his long duster and wide-brimmed hat. He'd spent enough years drifting through frontier towns to recognize injustice when he saw it. Without a word, he extended a hand toward the woman on the ground. "Madam," he said simply. Mabel hesitated, eyeing the stranger warily. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with a scar running along his jawline that spoke of a violent past. But his eyes, deep and steady, held no malice. "I don't need your help," she said, rising on her own. A hint of a smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Never said you did." The shopkeeper stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "You best move along, stranger. This ain't your business." Flint turned slowly, his hand casually resting near the Colt revolver on his hip. "Seems to me a man who throws a lady through a window has forfeited his right to decide what is and isn't my business." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. There was something in the stranger's stance, a coiled readiness that suggested he was more dangerous than his calm voice implied. "She ain't no lady," someone muttered from the crowd. "That's so," Flint replied, his eyes never leaving the shopkeeper. "Because from where I'm standing, she's the only one here showing any manners." He turned back to Mabel. "What supplies were you looking to purchase, madam?" Mabel blinked, surprised by the question. "Flour, coffee, some salt pork. Nothing extravagant." Flint nodded, then addressed the shopkeeper again. "You'll get those items for the lady. Now." "I will not." The words died in his throat as Flint took one deliberate step forward. No weapon was drawn, no threat was made, but the shopkeeper paled visibly. "Fine," he spat. "Wait here." When the man disappeared inside, Mabel turned to her unexpected champion. "I don't know who you are, mister, but I don't need your charity." "Flint Jacobson," he replied, removing his hat briefly. "And it's not charity. It's common decency." The shopkeeper returned with a small bundle, practically throwing it at Mabel. She reached for her coin purse, but Flint placed several coins on the boardwalk. "That should cover it," he said. As they walked away from the still murmuring crowd, Mabel kept her eyes fixed straight ahead. "Thank you, Mr. Jacobson, but you've just made an enemy in town before you've even had lunch. Wouldn't be the first time." He paused, studying her profile. "I reckon you could use a ride home with those supplies." She stopped walking. "My wagon's at the livery. I can manage." "I've no doubt." He matched her stride as she continued. But my mother raised me to offer assistance when it might be useful, whether it's needed or not. At the livery stable, Mabel's ancient wagon sat with one wheel obviously cracked. The livery owner, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, approached apologetically. "Sorry, Mabel. Found that wheel was worse than we thought when I checked it over. Won't be fixed till tomorrow at earliest." She closed her eyes briefly, calculating the long walk home with her supplies. Her homestead was 5 miles outside of town, a daunting prospect in the afternoon heat. "My horse is fresh," Flint offered. "We could secure your supplies and I could see you home." "You don't even know me," Mabel protested, though her resolve was weakening. "I know enough," he replied. "I know you're a woman alone facing a town that's turned against you. That's enough for me to offer help." The ride to Mabel's homestead was mostly silent. She sat stiffly behind him on his horse, holding the supplies in her lap and keeping as much distance between their bodies as the saddle would allow. As they crested a small rise, her property came into view, 40 acres of struggling farmland with a modest cabin and barn. "It's not much," she said defensively when Flint slowed the horse to survey the land. "It's yours," he replied. "That makes it something." He helped her down and carried the supplies to her porch. As he turned to leave, Mabel surprised herself. "Would you like some coffee, Mr. Jacobson?" "It's the least I can do to thank you." Flint hesitated, then nodded. "That would be welcome." Inside, the cabin was simple but meticulously clean. Mabel busied herself at the iron stove while Flint removed his hat and took in his surroundings. A small bookshelf held more volumes than he'd expect to find in a frontier home. A worn fiddle rested in one corner. "You play?" he asked, nodding toward the instrument. "My husband did," she replied, her voice tight. "I keep it, just because." Flint nodded, understanding loss without needing the details. When the coffee was ready, they sat at her small table. Mabel studied him openly now. "What brings you to Utica, Mr. Jacobson? We don't get many strangers who aren't passing through to the goldfields." "Looking for work," he said. "I've been driving cattle most of my life, but I'm getting too old for the long trails. Thought I might find something more settled." "How old are you?" she asked. 32 come December. Mabel almost smiled. "That's hardly ancient. In cowboy years, it's getting there." He sipped his coffee. "This is good. Thank you." A comfortable silence settled between them before Mabel spoke again. "Why did you help me today?" Flint considered the question seriously. "I've seen enough of this world to know that people are quick to judge what they don't understand, and slow to defend those who can't defend themselves." "I can defend myself," she said sharply. "I believe that," he nodded. "But everyone needs help sometimes." As the afternoon light began to fade, Flint rose to leave. "I should get back to town before dark." At the door he paused. "Those people in town, what did you do to earn their contempt?" Mabel's face hardened. "My husband died of fever last winter. I refused to sell this land to Harold Winters. He owns half the valley already. The rumors started soon after, that I'd been unfaithful, that Thomas didn't die of fever but something more sinister." She laughed bitterly. "As if I'd have had the time for impropriety while trying to keep this place going." "I'm sorry," Flint said simply. "Don't be. They were looking for a reason to hate me before that. I'm not from here. I have ideas they find troubling. I read books." She shook her head. "It doesn't take much on the frontier." Flint settled his hat on his head. "Well, Miss Raine, I thank you for the coffee." "Mrs." she corrected automatically, then smiled faintly. "Though I suppose it hardly matters anymore." 2 days later, Mabel was mending a fence line when she heard approaching hoofbeats. She reached for the rifle she kept nearby, relaxing only when she recognized Flint's dun-colored horse. "Mr. Jacobson," she called as he approached. This is unexpected. He dismounted, leading his horse the last few yards. Found work at the Double Cross Ranch, he explained. Thought I'd let you know I'll be staying in the area for a while. Mabel nodded, trying to ignore the strange flutter in her chest. I see. Well, congratulations. Also, he continued, pulling something from his saddlebag, I picked up your wagon wheel. The liveryman fixed it, but said you hadn't been back to town. I've been avoiding Utica, she admitted. After what happened. Can't blame you for that. He set the wheel down. Need help getting it back on your wagon? She started to refuse, then thought better of it. Yes, thank you. That would be helpful. As they worked together on the wagon, Mabel found herself watching his hands strong and capable, yet surprisingly gentle with the tools. When their fingers accidentally brushed, she pulled away as if burned. Sorry, he murmured, though they both knew he had nothing to apologize for. Over the next few weeks, Flint found reasons to ride by Mabel's homestead. Sometimes he brought supplies from town, saving her the trip. Other times he offered help with repairs that she'd been putting off. Each time, she protested that she didn't need assistance. Each time he simply nodded and helped anyway. On a warm June evening, he arrived with a small sack of hard candies. From Mrs. Patterson at the Double Cross, he explained. She sends them to all the neighbors. Mabel's eyebrows rose. I'm hardly a neighbor to the Double Cross. You are to me, he said simply. That night, they sat on her porch as the sun set, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. For the first time, Mabel told him about her life before Utica, how she'd grown up in St. Louis, the daughter of a schoolteacher who'd insisted on her education. How she'd met Thomas Raine, a dreamer with visions of starting a new life in the West. How they'd arrived in Montana territory full of hope, only to face the harsh realities of frontier life. He was a good man, she said softly, but not a particularly practical one. The first winter nearly broke us. The second did break him. Then the fever took him before the third. Flint listened quietly, watching the emotions play across her face in the fading light. And you? She finally asked. What's your story, Flint Jacobson? He shifted in his chair. Not much to tell. Born in Texas. Father died in the war. Started working cattle drives at 14. Been doing it ever since. No family? None living. He stared out at the darkening land. I had a wife once. Married young. She died in childbirth. The baby too. Mabel's hand moved instinctively toward his, then stopped. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. 12 years now. They sat in companionable silence until the first stars appeared. When Flint finally stood to leave, Mabel found herself wishing he would stay. You could come by tomorrow, she offered tentatively. If you wanted to. I'm making stew. His smile was small but genuine. I'd like that. Summer progressed, and with it, a tentative friendship blossomed between them. Mabel began to look forward to the sound of hoofbeats that signaled Flint's arrival. He brought news from town, books borrowed from Mrs. Patterson, and occasionally wild flowers he'd picked along the way. One Sunday in late July, he arrived with something wrapped in burlap tied to his saddle. What's that? Mabel asked as he untied it. Thought you might want to play. He unwrapped the package to reveal a guitar, worn but well cared for. I told you I don't play, she protested. No, you said your husband played the fiddle. He handed her the guitar. This is different. That evening, after a simple meal, Flint sat on her porch steps and showed her how to form basic chords. His fingers guided hers gently, and for once, she didn't pull away from his touch. Where did you learn to play? She asked as he demonstrated a simple tune. Trail drives, he explained. Long nights with nothing to do but watch cattle and stars. Music helps pass the time. As summer turned to fall, the visits became more frequent. Sometimes they simply worked side by side, preparing her homestead for the coming winter. Other times they talked for hours about books they'd read or places they'd seen. Occasionally, they played music together, Flint on his guitar, teaching Mabel simple melodies that she picked up with surprising quickness. In town, people noticed Flint's regular trips to the Raine homestead. Whispers followed him down the street, but he paid them no mind. When Harold Winters confronted him outside the saloon one evening, suggesting he was being taken in by a woman of questionable virtue, Flint's response was immediate and unequivocal. "Speak of Mrs. Raine that way again," he said quietly, "and they'll be carrying you out of here." The threat was delivered with such calm certainty that Winters backed down immediately. But the incident left Flint troubled. That night, as he sat with Mabel by her fireplace, he was uncharacteristically quiet. "What's wrong?" she finally asked. "People talk," he said simply. "People always talk," she replied with a shrug. "I stopped caring what they think a long time ago." "It's not right," he insisted. "The way they treat you, the things they say." Mabel set down her mending. "Flint, why do you keep coming here?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "You know what people are saying, that I've ensnared another man, that it's only a matter of time before you meet the same fate as Thomas." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "Why risk your reputation for me?" Flint stared into the fire for a long moment. "Because when I'm here, I feel something I haven't felt in a very long time." "What's that?" "At home." He met her gaze directly. "I feel at home, Mabel." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to address. "I should go," he said finally, rising from his chair. At the door, Mabel stopped him with a light touch on his arm. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not believing the worst of me." "I believe what I see," he replied. "And what I see is a woman of remarkable courage and dignity." The first snow fell in early November, blanketing the valley in pristine white. Flint arrived at Mabel's homestead with extra firewood and supplies, concerned about the approaching winter. "You can't stay out here alone," he said as they unloaded the provisions. "Last winter was mild. This one won't be." "I managed before," she reminded him. "Barely, by your own admission." He stamped snow from his boots on the porch. "The Double Cross has a line cabin 3 miles from here. Small but solid. No one uses it this time of year. You could stay there until spring. And give everyone in Utica the satisfaction of seeing me driven off my land?" She shook her head firmly. "No." Flint's frustration was evident. "Mabel, this isn't about pride. It's about survival." "It's about both," she countered. "This land is all I have left. I won't abandon it." Their argument, the first real one they'd had, continued inside the cabin as the snow fell more heavily outside. Neither noticed the deteriorating weather until Flint finally went to the door and found it nearly impossible to open against the drifting snow. "Looks like I'll be staying the night," he said grimly. Storms turned into a proper blizzard. Mabel's eyes widened. "You can't stay here. I don't have much choice. Unless you want me freezing to death trying to find my way back to the Double Cross." The impropriety of the situation wasn't lost on either of them. A woman alone with a man not her husband, even in circumstances forced by weather, would only add fuel to the town's rumors about Mabel. "You can take the chair by the fire," she said finally. "I'll get you some blankets." That night, as the wind howled around the cabin, Mabel lay awake in her bed, acutely aware of Flint's presence in the next room. The storm had forced an intimacy neither had anticipated, yet there was a strange comfort in knowing he was there, keeping the fire fed, standing guard against the elements. In the morning, the storm had passed, leaving a transformed landscape of deep drifts and crystalline beauty. Flint saddled his horse, preparing for the difficult ride back to the ranch. "I'll return tomorrow to check on you," he promised. Mabel nodded, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders against the biting cold. "Be careful." As he turned to go, she called after him, "Flint." When he looked back, she hesitated, then said, "Thank you for staying, for making sure I wasn't alone in the storm." His expression softened. "I'll always make sure of that, Mabel, if you'll let me." The promise lingered in the crisp winter air between them, unspoken but understood. The winter of 1878-79 proved to be one of the harshest in memory. Storms swept through the Montana Territory with savage regularity, isolating homesteads and testing the resolve of even the most seasoned settlers. For Mabel, each day became a battle against the elements chopping frozen wood, caring for her few livestock, keeping her cabin from being buried by drifting snow. Between storms, Flint made the treacherous journey to check on her, often staying for days when the weather turned. They established an unspoken routine. He would sleep in the chair or on a pallet by the fire, she in her bedroom with the door firmly closed. Yet despite these proprietary measures, a deepening bond formed between them as they weathered the winter together. On a rare, clear January evening, they sat by the fire playing a game of checkers on a board Flint had carved during one of the long, snowbound days. "What will you do when spring comes?" Mabel asked, moving a piece carefully across the board. "What do you mean? Will you stay at the double cross? Or move on?" She kept her eyes on the game, afraid to see his answer in his face before he spoke it. Flint considered the question. "I hadn't really thought about it. Depends, I suppose." "On what?" "On whether I have a reason to stay." He captured one of her pieces. "Your move." She stared at the board, suddenly unable to concentrate on the game. "And what would constitute a reason?" Flint reached across the board and gently lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You know what would, Mabel." The air between them seemed to crackle with tension. Mabel stood abruptly, moving to the window where frost patterns created intricate designs on the glass. "You don't want to get involved with me, Flint?" she said quietly. "Not really." He followed her to the window, standing close behind her but not touching. "Why would you say that?" "Because I'll just hurt you," she whispered, watching her breath fog the glass. "Everyone I care about, they get hurt." "That's not true, isn't it?" She turned to face him. "My husband died. My parents disowned me for marrying him. I have nothing to offer anyone." Flint's expression was serious. "I've spent most of my life avoiding attachments, Mabel. After Sarah died, I swore I'd never put myself in a position to feel that kind of pain again." He took a deep breath. "But then I met you. And for the first time in 12 years, I'm willing to risk it." "I'll just hurt you," she repeated, tears forming in her eyes. The cowboy said, "I'll just hurt you," she answered. "Then hurt me honest, not cruel." The simplicity of her response caught him off guard. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he brought his hand to her face, his thumb gently wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "I don't know how to do this anymore," she admitted. "How to trust someone. How to believe that happiness doesn't always end in tragedy." "Neither do I," he confessed. "But I'd like to try. With you." When he kissed her, it was gentle, a question more than a demand. Mabel hesitated only briefly before responding, her hands coming up to rest on his shoulders as something long dormant awakened within her. February brought a thaw both in the weather and between Flint and Mabel. Though he still maintained his residence at the Double Cross, he spent most of his time at her homestead, helping prepare for spring planting and making improvements to the cabin and barn. One evening, as they walked the boundaries of her property, planning where to plant various crops, Flint stopped at a rise overlooking the cabin. "What if we built a proper house?" he asked suddenly. "Right here where you can see the whole valley." Mabel looked at him in surprise. I'm asking you to marry me, Mabel." His directness was characteristic, no flowery speeches. Just honest words. "I want to build a life here. With you." "People will talk," she warned, though her heart was racing. "Let them." He took her hands in his. "I don't care what anyone in Utica thinks. I care what you think." She studied his face, the lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled, the scar along his jaw that told of a life of hardship, the steady gaze that had never once looked at her with anything but respect. "Yes," she said simply. "I'll marry you, Flint Jacobson." They were married in March by a circuit preacher who happened through Utica. The ceremony was small, just the two of them, Mrs. Patterson from the Double Cross, and the kindly livery owner who had always treated Mabel with respect. No one else from town attended, though word spread quickly. That evening, as husband and wife sat on their porch watching the sunset, Flint asked the question that had been on his mind for months. "Why did you agree to marry me? After everything you've been through, all your doubts. What changed your mind?" Mabel considered the question carefully. "When you said you just hurt me, I realized something. There's honest hurt, the kind that comes from loving someone, from building a life that might not always go as planned. And then there's cruel hurt, the kind the town inflicted, born of malice and judgment." She took his hand. "I can face honest hurt. It means I'm living again. Really living." Spring came to the Montana Territory, bringing new life and new beginnings. Flint and Mabel began construction on their house, a sturdy two-story structure that would overlook their expanded fields. With money he'd saved from years of trail drives, they purchased additional livestock and hired 2 hands to help with the increased workload. In town, attitudes slowly began to shift. It was hard to maintain vicious rumors about a woman who was now married to a man who had earned respect throughout the valley. Harold Winters still sneered when they passed on the street, but others in Utica began to nod in greeting, some even stopping to chat about the weather or crops. "Funny how a wedding ring changes their perception," Mabel remarked after one such encounter. Flint squeezed her hand. "It's not the ring. It's seeing you happy. Hard to believe the worst of someone who's clearly thriving." By summer's end, their new house was completed, and they hosted a barn raising that brought neighbors from miles around. Even a few townspeople attended, curious about the transformation of the struggling Raine homestead into the prosperous Jacobson ranch. As they prepared for bed that night in their new home, Mabel stood at the window, looking out over the land that had once been her prison and was now her kingdom. "I have something to tell you," she said as Flint came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What's that?" She turned in his embrace, her face alight with joy. "We're going to have a baby." His expression transformed from surprise to wonder to pure happiness in the space of a heartbeat. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be." Mrs. Patterson confirmed it. She bit her lip nervously. "Are you pleased?" In answer, he lifted her off her feet in a gentle embrace, laughing with unrestrained delight. Pleased doesn't begin to describe it. Their son was born the following spring, a strong, healthy boy they named Thomas Franklin Jacobson, honoring both Mabel's first husband and Flint's father. As Mabel watched Flint hold their child with reverent care, tears of happiness spilled down her cheeks. "What are you thinking?" he asked, noticing her tears. "That some hurts are worth enduring," she replied, "because they lead you to where you're meant to be." 5 years later, the Jacobson Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the valley. Their family had grown to include a daughter, Eleanor, born 2 years after Thomas. The house overlooking the valley rang with children's laughter and music. Flint still played his guitar in the evenings, and Mabel had mastered enough skills to join him, their harmony extending beyond the melodies they created. On a warm summer evening, as they sat on their porch watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, Mabel reached for Flint's hand. "Do you remember what I said to you that winter night when you first told me you were afraid of hurting me?" He smiled, the years having softened the lines of his face but not diminished the light in his eyes. "I remember everything about that night. I told you to hurt me honest, not cruel." She looked out at their thriving ranch, their beautiful children, the life they'd built together. "But you haven't hurt me at all, Flint Jacobson. You've only healed me." "We've healed each other," he corrected gently, bringing her hand to his lips. As darkness settled over the Montana Valley, they remained on the porch, hands entwined, watching over all they had created together, a testament to the power of honest hearts finding each other against all odds in the wild, unforgiving West.